get started because we've got some good content, a lot of good content to go through, a lot of good questions that came from all of you when you registered. We appreciate that. That helps guide our discussion as we go through. We've got some fantastic panelists for you. So welcome. Again, I'm Jason Baker, Vice President, Associate Publisher, Tampa Bay Business and Wealth. And this is, Bridgette, we believe that this is what, number 4?
Yeah.
Number 4 in our Virtual Connect series. Correct. We're in quarantine way too long and we forget how many we're doing and what day it is. This one is on navigating, no, not navigating. What am I talking about? This one is on our the current what we're seeing, what's going on with the layout of workspaces as we move forward, commercial real estate and construction, what we're going to see on the other side. So a really, really, really interesting conversation because it is huge to Tampa Bay, that industry. And it's going to be, again, real interesting when we start going back to work and seeing what those things are going to look like moving forward. So thank you all for coming. I love seeing your smiling faces. A couple ground rules as we walk through this, just real quick. Once we get started with our panelists, I will put you all on mute and I will ask you all to just kind of wait a second while we take our panelists and Bridgette off of mute so they can get started with their conversation. The best way to view these events is if you go to the top right corner of your screen and click speaker view. That will ensure that only the person that is speaking will show up on your large window in the middle. So that is usually the best way to do that. Please feel free to use the chat box. We will be monitoring that for any kind of questions that might pop up that we can pose and throw back to our panelists as we get close to the end of our conversation. So definitely do that. Jolene and Chelsea will be monitoring that on the back end. And last but not least, behave, because we're watching you. No bad behavior or you're out. So with that being said, I will pass it. Yeah, Jim, I mean you, that's it, behave. So with that being said, I'm gonna pass it over to Bridgette, our CEO and publisher of Tampa Bay Business of Wealth, to take it away and start our discussion.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you to Trenam, Colliers, SPP, and Beck for agreeing to be a part of this today. I know it's gonna be a very valuable conversation. Attendees, you guys did an amazing job with the questions. And I know we're gonna be able to provide information that you wouldn't otherwise get. So let's get right into it. Dave.
Hold 1 second, Bridgette. I'm gonna put everybody on mute and then we're gonna come back and unmute you and all our panelists. Hang on.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're good.
All right, Dave. What impact, if any, has COVID-19 had on?
Oh. You're gonna have to go again, Bridgette. Sorry, it all of a sudden muted you. You're good.
Okay, one more time. Dave, what impact, if any, has the COVID virus had on project milestones for our beloved Water Street Channel District project?
So good question. Fortunately for all of our contractors, can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So fortunately for all of our contractors, they're on site and working, and that's essential for us. You know, commercial construction in Hillsborough County, is considered essential. So, we've had no really schedule creep to date. All of our GCs have adopted health protocols, which is really important. And certainly, Ryan can speak to that, but we have what I would call more of a health compliance person with each individual general contractor that is making certain that there's proper social distancing, that they're doing all the right things to make certain that we're keeping our general contractor, the staff and all the workers on site, to keep them healthy. So we're very fortunate, knock on wood, to date, we're pretty much on schedule. The one thing that we're anxious for is a JW Marriott, because we have a deal with the NFL that we have to deliver that on time for February of 21. And right now we're on schedule. So we'll deliver JW Marriott by year end. We have about 10 buildings under construction right now, and knock on wood, and now we're getting into the spring season with a little bit of rain, but for all intents and purposes, we're on schedule, which is really good.
Yeah, that's fantastic news. Great. I'm really happy to hear that, and I'm sure everybody else is too. Ryan, how about you? How's the COVID virus impacting commercial construction around the Tampa Bay region? It doesn't sound like it's impacting the Water Street project, but what about other projects?
Yeah, so good afternoon. First off, for those of you who don't know me, which is probably the vast majority of you, my name is Ryan Toth. I run the Florida office for the Beck Group. We are a full-service design and construction firm, which it kind of puts us in a unique spot in our market. We do commercial projects, a lot of things at University of Tampa, University of South Florida, Tampa Airport, projects like that. But we do in a unique way. We have architecture and construction in one roof, or under one roof. And we have about 160 architects nationally, and about 600 or 700 builders. So construction certainly was impacted right away from COVID. And a lot to what Dave said earlier, the initial day-to-day, and I'll give you a day-to-day impact, and then I'll give you kind of the macroeconomic answer as well, which is also kind of interesting. But on a day-to-day basis, day one was really, everyone panicking and kind of freaking out as far as how we're going to handle this. It's really put a lot of onus on the folks on site to adjust and adapt to a healthier way of working. And so really what it's turned out to be is, there's a screening process as you enter the job, which is completely new to our field. And there's a questionnaire and your name is recorded as you enter the site. What we've also done to allow for that is to stagger the start times of all of our trade contractors so that not everyone shows up to start the job at the same time. So painters will show up at 7 and plumbers at 7:15 and so on. Then we've also installed hand washing stations as you're in line to sort of check into the job. And so now you've got these folks that are all washing their hands, they're all checking in, they're all doing a response and a questionnaire. And then also just throughout the building. So if we're doing a 6-story residence hall for University of South Florida, for instance, we've got the trades separated on floors. So the tile guy is on the 6th floor and separate from, the painter who's on the 2nd floor and things like that, just so that they're able to sort of functionally separate. But just planning that and doing all that has just slowed us down a little bit initially. Now we're back up to speed as everyone sort of gets used to the new normal. But that was a process. Macroeconomically speaking, it certainly impacted us as well. I would tell you that probably our business has softened almost immediately. Probably 15 to 20% of our work for the year has probably fallen off or pushed into next year, because probably 15 to 20% of what we were getting ready to do was new work starts. And there was certainly some trepidation from our clients on the front side of starting any work. And we had a project that was supposed to start this month and one that was supposed to start next month here locally, both of which have just sort of slid forward. So we're adjusting to that. I think longer term for the Tampa Bay region for us, we sort of anticipate, and this happened to us last time during the economic downturn, was we usually, at least for the construction business, we're usually a lagging indicator. And that means we get the sort of whipsawed to a large degree. So the economy will recess and then we will feel it a year and a half later, just based on the behavior of the market. And so while we'll have a year and a half of backlog here from this point forward into 2021 and finish up those projects, we're sort of looking downstream into the end of 21 and into 22 and anticipating what that's going to be. So we're cautiously optimistic in what we talk to our clients. Nationally speaking, we do work for a lot of folks affected by this. We're doing a large project in Dallas for American Airlines. We're doing a very large project in Atlanta for Simon Properties. We're doing a big mall project and hotel project. And we're just sort of waiting to see what happens there as far as those projects and if they continue to go. So it's been an adventure, but I think there's still a wait and see attitude as well.
Great. Thanks so much. Danny, let's talk about the new office space. What it's going to look like? How is it going to account for social distancing? Are the collaboration pits and all the open area, common areas? Is that going to go back to the 90s? Are they going to be a thing of the past? And what about elevators and the common areas and the proverbial water cooler? So talk about what the new office space is going to be.
Yeah, I think, well, let's just say I hope we don't go completely back to that area. But first and foremost, thanks for having me on. So for those, there's quite a few familiar faces I've seen on here, so this is kind of nice to see everybody again. But for those who don't know me, Danny Rice with Colliers International. We're a third-party commercial real estate brokerage firm. So we essentially represent business owners, like a lot of people on the call right now, in finding their office space, giving them guidance around workplace solutions, essentially helping negotiate rents and rates and all of the different pieces. So as you can imagine, we are a huge advisor right now through times like this, because overnight, many questions have come about. And one of the questions continuously being talked about right now is this whole concept of what happens to the current office space. What's the impacts to the layouts? What exactly do we have to do? I think that question probably could go on for an hour of responses, right? And it's every single business and every single industry is going to have their own nuances. And I think a lot of it is everybody has to look at how their current layout is today, how the CDC and how all the government regulations and what they're going to be putting in place, that's going to potentially impact it. Is there going to be short-term and then long-term impacts? Yes, short-term. I think Ryan talked about this in terms of the construction site of staggering people coming into the sites. It's going to be the same thing with all of the employees coming into office. It's not going to be a flip of the switch and all 100 employees show up into office space and we're all going back to normal. So there will be decisions that's going to have to be made just around what you have today and how the layout of that office. The open office concept, I don't think that goes away. I think it just changes. I don't think there's going to be a shift away from the shift to that open office concept, but I do think we've kind of gone back and forth on the pendulum where back 10, 20 years ago, it was very much private offices. It was very big offices. And then we probably over the past 5 to 7 years shifted to this very much open concept, no offices, everybody sharing and we all love each other and we all want to sit next to each other and everything. And now we're going to fall somewhere back into the middle. I think that shift was already happening. This might just accelerate that and finding that happy medium. But the big question comes in some ways when you think about it, there's cost associated with that. So every business, there's not a single person on this call right now that probably hasn't seen their revenues impacted in some form or fashion. So to do a massive capital expenditure to redesign an entire office to accommodate social distancing and all of the different components is a big challenge to have to make versus saying work from home is a good solution and hoteling and sharing. But that creates other potential challenges, right? So even if we go into a world of maybe minimizing office space a little bit and co-working the office space and hoteling, now you have to start really thinking about the cleanliness of each space because, Bridgette, if you're there today and then I have the same spot tomorrow after you, and if I don't know you, I don't know how clean you are. I don't know what you did the day before I sat down at that chair, right? So the layout of the office space, I think, is honestly to be determined a little bit. There's lots of studies that Colliers is doing on that. We have lots of different surveys that we've been pushing out. I think we just did one recently that 4 out of every 5 survey respondents said would love to work from home 1 or 2 days a week. And so what exactly does that do? How does management and how do companies manage better from afar? I mean, technology has evolved very quickly in the past 30 days.
Oh yeah.
And forced us all to get comfortable with seeing 45 people right now looking at me, right? So it's a unique world that very quickly changed. But I think that the overall open office layout is going to stay put in some ways, but there's going to be changes on how we do it. The water cooler, as you said, hanging around in kitchens and stuff, you probably will see some design changes around that. And one of the big things, it might not be layouts, it's the furniture inside the space that's going to change. So it's how the workstations are either configured and how people face each other, to how chairs and how the different types of actual construction and, whether you're using copper more and various things to make sure that germs don't stay put as they could. I think you'll see some furniture changes around that as well. But, is there going to be some shifts? I think some companies absolutely will make some drastic stuff if they're very dense and people were extremely close together. If you're set up in an environment that you already have natural, distancing, I don't think there's going to be a lot of change that'll come around that as well. But more to come. Our clients are asking it every day.
Great, thank you. That was a great answer. Wait, I have to, this is off script, but I have to ask you, what's the deal with copper?
So it has different, what do you want to call it, ingredients internally that sanitizes and basically, and Ryan might know this better on the construction side than I do, but it doesn't allow germs and various bacteria to hold on the surface like a general surface does. So if you look at certain buildings and elevators, they might change the buttons to that or the different handrails and stuff so that when people do grab them, it doesn't actually stay as long. Copper is a natural resistant to some of these types of bacteria and so forth. I'm not playing doctor today to say that that will eliminate all COVID-19 cases out there. But the point being is it definitely allows us to think differently about the materials being used for construction. And Brian, I don't know if you've had anything on that as well, or if you guys have started asking those questions, or Dave, but I'd love to hear that. It's a good question.
No, I mean, you may be spot on, but I haven't heard that yet.
Dave, have you?
No, ours is more on the operational side. So if you're looking at a touchless environment in a commercial office building, it's a function of, if you look at the experience of somebody walking into a building, how do they grab the door handle? How do they open that building? How do they, touchless elevators? So you don't want to touch a button. So much of the technology, the shift is going to be toward the apps on your phone. So the ability to actually, there will be, as you have for ADA purposes, you can open a door for ADA purposes with a touch. Well, perhaps that'll be an app on your phone that'll allow those tenants in that building to use that app on their phone to open the front door to the building, to call the elevator, and then to get up to their floor, and ultimately to open the door to their suite. So those are some of the technologies we're looking at from an operational standpoint. And one other that I was sent an email about a technology, which is, it almost looks like a magnetometer that you're walking through, but it's biometric. So it can take your temperature and do other things that allow the PM team, the property management team, to know that this person is not sick. So those are more the technologies that I know now from a biotech and biomed standpoint that are going to be looked at very heavily from a commercial real estate standpoint.
Anybody else feel like they're in a sci-fi movie that we watched at some point?
Big Brother's watching.
Yeah. All right, Stephanie, it is your turn. Let's talk about commercial landlords, what they're doing about rent relief for their tenants, and whose business has been severely hampered as a result of the coronavirus pandemic.
Sure, thanks, Bridgette. I'm Stephanie Lieb. I'm from Trenam Law. I practice in the area of insolvency. I represent a number of banks, but also a number of commercial landlords are keeping me busy right now. Represent them in the distressed tenant situation, restructuring, bankruptcies, and workouts, that kind of thing. So I'll try not to depress you with with all how busy I am right now. But to answer your question, I think that my clients, my commercial landlord clients, are dealing with tenant requests for rent relief on a tenant by tenant basis generally. I mean, a lot of them are, you can't treat a tenant that has an essential business that has been open, that maybe has declining revenue, but still has revenue, the same as a tenant who has been forced to close as a result of the COVID-19. And you also can't treat a tenant who has never previously faltered on a lease the same as one that has been limping along since before the COVID closures. There are some larger commercial real estate landlords in the state who have created a framework for rent abatement, like a program, like you saw in the news. Publix created a rent program for their tenants. If they qualify, they could have an abatement. But also I think the landlords are looking at the tenants and saying, okay, well, did you get a PPP loan? Because if you were successful in obtaining that type of aid, that one of the qualifying expenses is for rent, so that should give you some runway. So I think it's a case by case.
What about lease modifications for companies who want to downsize because they've finally figured out that their workforce can stay at home?
Right. Well, obviously that's going to be dictated by the terms of the lease, but we're not really in that world right now. We're just trying to be practical. But I think to be practical, most of the landlord clients who are being approached by that are taking a wait and see approach. I think it's too soon. Like Danny says, how you use the space may change, but there's a cost to that. And I think we haven't even reopened yet. So most of the landlords are saying, let's reevaluate when the reopening occurs. Let's see how well your business is doing and how it's able to recover, and then reevaluate, what the needs are at that time. But if the landlords do decide to give the forgiveness, do a restructure, there are a number of different approaches that they have taken. You can do a deferral of the rent, where the rent could come due when everyone's back open for business. There could be a deferral that goes over time, or that gets put on the end of the lease. There's also rent forgiveness, just for the months that are closed, or all bets are off. You can just restructure the lease completely. And a lot of the landlords are opting for that because they're taking the opportunity to change some provisions in their leases that they just weren't happy with. If you're restructuring the lease, all bets are off. There are some provisions that you can get rid of.
Great, thank you.
I was going to say something, Bridgette, on that too. And one of the things on the landlord side is understanding who the landlord is, and essentially, I don't want to say who they report to, but if they've got a lender behind the project, they can't make certain decisions because there's potentially language in their financing documents and lending documents that stipulates that no decisions can be made with tenants unless it's approved by the lender, right? So it's each scenario. I think to Stephanie's point, each scenario is absolutely different. Every tenant that we've worked with and or consulted with, it's a different scenario. The one thing that I would say is consistent is, the ones that look at it as we're all in this together, is, this is impacting the landlord, but it's also impacting the tenant at the same time, and is being respectful about it. Those are the ones that are working together better. If you're just going to a landlord and asking for rent abatement and forgiveness, but yet, your business is still making money and you can't show any damages, that's not a good position to be in. So just food for thought on that one as well. It's so unique.
No, that's good input, because I had heard that from a couple of my commercial real estate lending guys. And I didn't know that prior. It's one of those things that you don't necessarily know.
You think about it.
Hey, Bridgette, can I add on to what Danny and Stephanie were saying? So we're fortunate. Water Street Tampa, we're in construction mode right now, which means we don't have a lot of signed leases, and we're not cash flowing with tenants. So we have very few workouts. So from a timing standpoint, we're very, very fortunate. That said, we have Sparkman Wharf, we have the retail tenants there, and of course we have the Marriott, the Tampa Marriott Water Street, which of course has been impacted. But the point I want to make is that in my career in DC, I was with Brookfield, and I checked in with some of my colleagues at Brookfield just the other day, and they're going through exactly what Stephanie and Danny have explained. Is they're going through these workouts. And the real requirement is the documentation. Before any landlord can effectively make a change, it is subject to, of course, the ownership and subject to lender approval. Mm-hmm. So, and you need to ask for a lot of documentation, because it's interesting. My former colleague in DC, she's getting called from tenants that she knows that they're not in distress, but they're just getting on the bandwagon. They're asking because they can. And it's an easy no. We just okay, send it. And you can't say no without seeing documentation. So it takes some time to get that documentation. So that in effect is going on right now. And that's going to continue throughout the remainder of this year and into 21.
And it's not just the lenders. I think that's a really good point. It's not just the lenders, but when you're talking about a shopping center, you also have to consider the co-tenancy requirements of, what the landlord can do that would not put them in violation of another tenant's lease in the same shopping center.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense too. Great. Thank you guys for clarifying that. So I'll toss this one to everybody. How are things currently? Are deals still getting done? Dave, are people still signing leases for Water Street?
It certainly has slowed. So we're looking at deal flow in really 3 tranches right now. You've got deals that were in progress that were subject to a lease expiration date that are getting done because they need to, because they have that obligation to get that done. So there's a third of them roughly, and I'm making for simplicity purposes, a third of them are getting done. A third of them that were in progress, they may be a lease, but the tenant is saying we're going to place them on hold. And then the other third are the deals are just getting, they're permanently put on hold. They're just canceling the deals wholesale. So we're fortunately, as I said, because we're in construction right now, we're not seeing a lot of that, but that is exactly what we're seeing in the way of deal flow. I anticipate that between now and the end of the year is when really it's a lot of due diligence. People and that's what we're doing right now. We're in data collection mode because we're trying to wrap our heads around the impact to us financially. So we're rewriting models and pro formas, but also operationally and what this means. And as far as design changes, that's a much broader and bigger issue that takes much longer. But the point is we're really collecting information now, and we'll be collecting it for the next probably quarter or two. And then we really won't know what the implications are to the overall development, probably well into 21.
Great, thanks. Ryan, anything to add?
Yeah, I will say we did have some deals that actually went through over the last week and a half. We were awarded the design on the St. Pete incubator, and then also we're given a notice to proceed on University of South Florida Davis Hall renovation. So those were good signs, but both of those things were sort of mature in the pipeline. To Dave's point, I think most of our clients who have new work that they may have pushed, or when we call them, they're saying, I don't know what to tell you right now. Let's hang on and see what happens. I think they are also in data collection mode. And I think that it's probably going to take them into the fall to figure out what this is doing to their business. And then also we do have some deals that, and this just is by nature of our business, that are based around fundraising. And obviously it's probably not a great time to be fundraising, for the Jesuits of the world, or the Tampa Museums of Art, or the, Judy Genchef building the Honors College up at USF. Those are all representative of things that have sort of pushed for us, which hopefully one day will come roaring back. But right now it's sort of touch and go.
I'm going to go off script again and ask you to follow up on something, because I'm a trustee for St. Pete College, and I was on the phone with the college earlier today talking about an upcoming one of these, and they were talking about the future of higher education. So the fact that you got a deal done for a residence hall when it's like big up in the air as to whether or not kids are even going to live in dorms anymore moving forward is really interesting to me.
Yeah, well, we are finishing a residence hall, so I'm glad of that. It was very mature in the pipeline. We're probably 70% done with the University of South Florida St. Pete residence hall on their campus in St. Petersburg. The deal that we just started and got a notice to proceed on is a renovation of their main classroom building, Davis Hall, on their main campus in St. Pete. And so they had that money secured a long time ago. We got into budget. They liked what we were doing, and so they cut us loose. But we were encouraged by that, just the fact that they weren't preserving that capital and collecting that cash and let us go forward. So, and then the St. Pete incubator was also the same thing, is that some of these things have been secured a long time ago. I think that one is actually federally funded. And
I was going to ask, is it impacted by if they're government funded?
Yeah, and JP's nodding his head too, but right. Some of those things are, the way they're funded matters. I think privately, we're going to have a bit more challenge on our client side of funding, depending on their business model.
Makes sense. Danny, anything to add?
I won't repeat too much of what they said in terms of if it was already in the pipeline and, getting done, but I'll just go more asset by asset type. Of course, we all know retail, restaurants, they're the most impacted through all of this. When you put a guideline in order that says you can't open restaurants, you can only do to go. Obviously, that's going to halt any decision making around restaurants of new spaces and stuff. That category has been challenged, but there's a lot of opportunistic retailers that are looking at this as once things start to pick back up, which I would say in the past week and a half, we're starting to have those conversations again. That they know that there's going to be some of their competitors that are going to shut down locations. And this is the opportunity to take, some of those good locations that weren't available because it's been a very robust 10 years of growth. So I think, each asset's different. Industrial is still just as active, just as hot. It's slowed down depending on the industry type. But if you are a industrial owner and you have an industrial tenant that has anything to do with e-commerce right now or grocery, you're very happy and you're very satisfied to have them as a tenant. And there's a lot of expansion happening around that. So you'll see more growth around that. Office users, there's still good amount. I think most of that is very hit and miss depending on where it was in the process and how badly their lease expiration is coming up and how badly they need to take a new lease or renew. So a lot of them are renewing in place and just staying put for a short-term 1-year renewal type scenario just to kind of get through the time. So it's active, on the other side, some luxury things that we do like marinas and golf course transactions and stuff. Those are still going well because sometimes they're cash buyers, high net worth individuals that aren't as impacted. And so it really just depends on the industry. It depends on the asset type and the location, but there's still a good amount of deals that are happening for sure.
Great, thanks. Stephanie, you look like you want to say something.
Oh, I do? Oh, I do. In terms of, I guess I can only talk from the perspective of what legal work is still there still is to do right now. And we're a full service business law firm, so we have a mergers and acquisitions group. They're certainly slowed down. Our litigation group is slowed down just because of the nature of the court closures and what you can and cannot do virtually. Certainly, we've dedicated a number of people to the PPP loans. The insolvency practice is unfortunately booming, and I've gotten more calls from buyers and alternative lenders saying, if you see something, this is what I'm interested in, turning me into their personal shopper. So, for what that's worth, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. So Dave, let's talk about the new sexy big ticket item from a development perspective. What are people going to be looking for from an office amenity perspective in the new world? You're on mute. Jason, can you unmute him?
There we go.
Hi.
So, I think many of you pretty much, well, if you don't, we're a large mixed-use development, and we have a lot of unique features to it's 9 million square feet built over 11 years, and we're incorporating a lot of unique amenities that are into it. A big part of what we're doing has to do with open space now more than ever, and so what on this question, Bridgette, the focus would be on well. We're the first well-certified, pre-certified well district in the world. There are 12 others that have applied, and they're going through that process. So what that means is our buildings will be well-certified. And what does it mean to be well-certified? Well, it means it's the LEED certification is about the built environment, and then well is about the people environment. So it has to do with the quality of light, air, temperature, it's water quality. All those things go into well certification. Our buildings get certified every 3 years, so we have to stay up with that certification in order to maintain well. The reason I'm bringing this up as an amenity is because, and it's certainly one of the pillars of the entire development, being about a very walkable environment and well, but it's because now it's everything they're going through as a result of the pandemic that we feel that there will be a greater appetite for, I'm going to say, the broader public to seek out opportunities in commercial real estate in every asset class that will have a focus on some aspect on well and health and living your best life. But certainly getting back to health, that's going to be one of the bigger issues. So the pivot for us is really, from an operational standpoint, is really going to be looking long term on what we need to do. As I was mentioning about opening doors and elevators and so forth that are touchless, a lot of that thinking and a lot of that research now from an operational standpoint is going to go into this. How much fresh air is brought into a building? Those are all the things that owners are now going to have to really understand the fundamentals of, and there are costs associated with that. Because I remember 20 years ago or 25 years ago, a LEED certified building meant for you to be for you to have your space be LEED certified, it meant another 10%. So there will be costs associated with new technologies that are going to be incorporated into the workplace environment. But right now, I think a lot of the research that's going to take place over the next couple of years will focus on the well, on well and the health of the general office consumer.
Is well an acronym for something?
No, it's just well. I mean, it's
just well. Okay.
Well, yeah. So you can go to the It's the U.S. It's the International Well Institute, and they have this whole pre-certification and so forth, and there are a lot of standards that you have to abide by. So, it's something that is important to us because of the I've got a dog here that's okay. That people have been, even prior pre-COVID, we're focused on, but now more than ever,
Yeah.
it's going to become a real issue for, as I said, for the general consumer of every asset class, whether it's hotel, it's hospitality, or it's resi, or office, or retail, or even public realm.
And that's going to impact employment, right? So if you think about it, if I'm recruiting anybody to come be an employee at Colliers, they're going to now judge the space I have, not just from the look of it, but potentially the filtration systems and what it offers, and the safety of their well and wellness and healthiness within the space. I mean, I can tell you from even some of our clients that we're starting to talk to, that checklist when they would go look at spaces, it might have been 10 to 15 items. Now there's 5 other items on there about all the things you just talked about, Dave, around does it have this, doesn't have that. Before It was the bathrooms, were they in good shape? Did they smell fine? Now it's not just about the bathrooms, it's about the entire functionality of that building. And that's part of the decision-making process. So it's absolutely going to change how we look at it.
So one thing it's nothing new to commercial real estate that you have rooftop terraces and you have conferencing and so forth. Now we're going to look at the redesign of that. What does it mean for social distancing in these amenities? Fitness facilities are a big one, because if you look at, the density of people that have come into a fitness facility where it's a tenant-only facility, there's an obligation to the landlord to make certain, from a legal standpoint, this gets to Stephanie, what is the liability to a landlord in the event that he didn't clean that facility properly? Things like that. So there are going to be a lot of standards that are going to be, I believe, adopted in the future, which are going to place a lot of the onus and a lot of the obligation back to the landlord to perform.
So you don't see this as being a 1 year, 2 year, you see this as being from here on out how it's done?
Yeah, but let me bring up a point. When I was, in DC, my whole career after 9/11, the security standards for commercial office buildings, certainly in government occupied buildings, that standard has been maintained. But in public commercial office buildings, or private, I should say, private commercial office buildings, the level of security was very high for probably 2-3 years, and then they kind of went back to their old habits. I do see a little bit of that here, that I see that there's a heightened awareness of everything related to COVID that is going to have an impact on our industry for the immediate future. But for the long term, if there are any parallels to draw from what we went through with 9/11, there is a chance that people will go back to their old habits, and you're going to see more, more dense congregating and things like that.
Great, thanks. So Ryan, what is one thing that you are either thinking about doing differently or that you're going to have to do differently that will be a change to your business?
Yeah, I think just the term flexibility comes to mind. Running a construction and architecture business, the architects just by nature are already very keen on flexibility and the idea of working wherever, whenever, and very comfortable with freelance and a lot of the things that builders traditionally aren't. And so it's been an interesting blend already. But one of the things I was thinking about getting ready for this call was, in our planning in the past, we've always sort of said, man, we should try to have these folks work from home when we were looking at space planning or whatever. We never really got to that. It was always a bit of a risky thing to try it, because then culturally, do you let the other people do it? And, and this has basically been a good thing from that standpoint, because it's forced us to try this experiment. And we found out that a good bit, obviously we can't do construction from home, but a good bit of our design business, all of our pre-construction and estimating services, and most of our back of house stuff and marketing and sales can be done from home pretty well. And so
I don't think you're the only company that learned that lesson through this process.
That's pretty good, right? Like, it's been an interesting lesson, and kind of puts a new perspective on your space and what you use it for. And so we've had some interesting just preliminary discussions around that. But I think just being open to flexibility now that we've experienced it is a good thing.
Sure. Danny, do you think that, and I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball, but you are the expert in this. So do you think that companies are going to postpone coming back, even if they're allowed to, while they wait for their spaces to be reconfigured or retrofitted? Or do you think that everybody's going to rush back in right away? Or what do you see happening?
It's going to be business by business, right? So if I'm a restaurant, I'm probably going to be much more eager to get back because my livelihood, the success of that business depends on it being open to have, consumers come in and spend money. If you're a back office type group and you figured out, as Ryan said, that the work from home does work and you can be efficient and still get the job done, maybe at 85 to 90%, you're probably not going to rush as quickly as back because you want to make sure that you take the right steps and phases to get back in the office. And that might be reconfiguring certain things if you have to. It might be just ordering supplies and face masks and all the different things that you might need to just have in place before you say the doors are open. So I think it's going to be industry by industry. From what I've seen in a lot of our clients, there's been a general consensus that we're all eager to get back into the office, not as much from a work standpoint per se, but from a camaraderie standpoint, from a culture standpoint, from a people standpoint, and just a motivational standpoint. If you haven't been used to a stay-at-home, work-from-home environment as your typical job environment, it can very quickly get lonely. It can very quickly get demotivating. And, if you're sitting here and, all of a sudden something on the news catches your attention, it's easy just to put your feet up for 10 minutes and just watch that. And all of a sudden a day's off and it's 2 hours later. Right. So I think there's a natural want to be back to the office for the camaraderie standpoint. I think a lot of businesses are going to make the decisions around that more to just engage everyone. But if your business is allowed and able to be remote, then it's going to be a slow stagger into there. I'm going to go back to the point I think I made earlier, which is if you're going to retrofit, if you're going to go through a process and it's going to be a massive capital expenditure, that's a tough decision if revenues are down and how you're going to do that and how you're going to accommodate for that. So case by case is probably the right way to put it. But I think there's a lot of eagerness just to get back to normal.
Absolutely. I agree with you. So risk mitigation, liability stuff, everybody's got that top of mind as well. Stephanie, can you talk about how commercial landlords can protect themselves while they're also making accommodations for their tenants?
Yeah, happy to. I think like Danny said, I'll start with the proposition that reasonable humans are more successful at this. CRE landlord-tenant relationships are marriages. They're long-term, and so keeping an open dialogue with the tenants between landlord and tenant, just like between lender and borrower, the more you know, the more you can get ahead of issues and help both sides through. I think you have to look at this through the lens of, well, what's my worst case scenario, right? That's how I live my life, unfortunately. So you weigh, all right, if everything falls apart, what am I looking at? Well, right now, every state court in Tampa Bay has a moratorium on evictions for possession. So if you consider, all right, if this relationship goes south, how long would it take me to forcibly remove my tenant, clean up that space, try to relet that space? Who's going to be willing to sign up a new lease right now and at what price? And then you say, well, maybe I can work with this, So I think when you're talking about working with your tenants, you say, all right, well, let me first understand what my lease says, because it's a 50-page document and I really don't know what it says. You got to look and see, what does it say about your defaults? What does it say about your notice requirements? What opportunities to cure? And then this whole thing about, you've seen everybody talk about the force majeure clauses and whether, what those look like, and they're not all created equally. But it's an opportunity, like I said, to revisit some of the things in the lease that you don't like necessarily, and while you're giving some relief to your tenant. A lot of my clients are seeking additional like letters of credit to back the leases, or trying to shore up personal guarantees with the collateral for the personal guarantee, notice provisions, that kind of thing. And again, the co-tenancy piece of it in shopping centers is really important. Making sure that you're not, while trying to help one, no good deed goes unpunished, trying to help one person out of a difficult situation, you're putting yourself in hot water with another one.
Makes a lot of sense. So we are coming to running out of time, and there's a couple of really important questions that I want to get you guys to rapid fire answer if you can. And one of them, I hope I'm really glad I asked you because I don't know how you're going to answer it. But are we facing another 2007, 8, 9 in commercial real estate, or is this just going to be a blip? I mean, whoever wants to go first on that.
I'm an eternal optimist, so kind of have to hedge what I'm going to say by looking at it that way. But I will say this: the last time we went through this, we had a sick financial system, and I think it's encouraging that this time we have something that's affecting our economy, but our economy in and of itself is healthy, and the financial system is healthy, and there's trust in and amongst that process. And so our hope and expectation is that there's a pretty good V-shaped recovery here. And we do think there will be things will recede while people figure out what this has done to their business, but then, quickly thereafter, it'll probably pick back up. But that's our feeling at the moment. We talk about it quite a bit. So hopefully we're right.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan. We're coming economically from a position of strength, which is very different than it was, 8 years ago. So we're very optimistic that, again, we're doing a lot of studying now for probably the next 60 to 90 days, and then really to understand further into Q3 and Q4 how we pivot and how we adjust from either a design, operational, standpoint, or construction standpoint, and then pretty optimistic that things will, it'll be a creep, but things will start to go back to normal as we get into 21.
Yeah, I'll add. I think a lot will depend a little bit around whether the vaccine is made sooner or later or whenever, because we can. I'm optimistic that the same things. I don't want to repeat what Dave and Ryan said, but we easily over the next 6 months could see COVID cases start to go back up, and then what, right? Or it could stay. Everybody does a really good job social distancing, and we do okay. So I don't think that the two are comparable in some ways. The last one was much more of a, or if you want to call it a top-down type approach, but the financial industry is what has got us into the mess, right? By making decisions that the end consumers maybe didn't realize, or it may create challenges. This one's almost the opposite, where not necessarily consumers did anything wrong, but we forced restaurants to close. We forced the end consumer not to be able to do what they're doing. That is now trickling up towards the financial side, which if that then gets worse, then of course, then you got challenges. But I think, starting to see the light with the state starting to release a little bit of the order starting next week. You'll see the local counties. We're at that point where we're going to start to see things come back, and everyone's itching to get back to the normal activity level, and almost more motivated, frankly. So I think you'll see some activity that'll come out of it. It's just going to be different activity. I think as we've been talking about, it's going to be totally different mindsets. It's going to be looking at things differently, and those changes create opportunities, and those opportunities are good for the business and good for activity for all of us.
I think I will refrain from being let me just say I look at it a little bit differently, but I think this is not like we'll have a 2008 real estate related issue, and we certainly have the trickle up effect of real estate, but this is an industry agnostic issue, and I think it will put in the ground a number of industries that were already teetering, like retail. You've seen movie theaters, CMX filed bankruptcy the other day. The XFL never got off the ground, didn't have a chance. But and the trickle up effect to real estate, I think, will be felt. I mean, we still don't know how much bailout we have coming, right? How much more stimulus will be coming. So I think it's too early to say. But I think unfortunately some industries won't recover. But I don't think the impact on commercial real estate will be as bad as it was in the crash.
Yep.
Great. Chris, I'm going to call you out. He just posted in the chat that phase 1 was approved. So it sounds like maybe Monday we have the opportunity to go back to work if we want to, or go back to our offices, I should say. So there's some good news for the afternoon. One more question from me, and then if we can have a few minutes to get to some of the questions from the group, that would be great. This is a debate that I've heard every time I've spoken to somebody in the industry, and I know you guys are doing it. So again, I'm going to ask everybody to weigh in that has an opinion. Are companies going to lease more space, buy more space because they're going to need more space per person? Or are they going to lease or buy less space because they are going to pivot to this work, you know, letting their teams work from home? And do you think it's going to even out?
Do you want our like personal benefit answer out of that one, or do you want like what really
No, I
maybe?
want the truth.
I mean, I'll start. I mean, you know, it's interesting because everybody I think that is on the panel here in some way, maybe Stephanie's in a different light for what her job is, but you know, if the answer was yes, everybody's going to occupy more space, that's fantastic for construction, that's fantastic for developers, that's fantastic from a business generation. I think it's going to be very challenging for any business owner to say they're going to be able to spend that extra money to, you know, if you look at some offices, and I wish I knew the exact statistic on this, but if you were to follow to the T of the CDC guidelines with the 6-foot spacing and all of the components of it, the average office space user would probably have to increase their space by 40 to 50%. And when you look at just the sheer bottom line of the impact that has of overall cost, one of two things starts to happen. Rents either have to come down, or you're going to have to start saying employees are going to have to work from home because just your cost is going to have to be attained to. So I don't believe you're going to see a massive change around office requirements saying, yes, let's go ahead and get an extra 40, 50% of what we have today. I think we will all figure out how to adapt and live with the reality of being social distancing in our offices. And we're going to get creative around timeliness of how employees come and go to the offices and whether some can work from home and not. And I think you'll see more of that versus the decision to have more office space.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to agree with that. I think we're already talking about A/B schedules. And I think probably near term, this is going to be a net neutral thing, I would guess. People are going to use their space probably differently. So there may be some rework required, you know, if you have a situation that doesn't allow that, hoteling and the like. But I think we're already moving towards those discussions rapidly as we think about returning to work. And we have big office in Dallas and a big office in Atlanta, and they're ahead of us as far as getting back to work. So processing the A/B schedules, just flexibility being the term, and then figuring out how to make your space flex is probably going to be, in my opinion, probably going to be net no different.
Yeah. I would agree. I think on the margins, you're going to find that, you know, less densification is going to be studied. I don't think people really understand the impact. I think it's going to be industry, it's going to be, you know, different from one industry to the other. In other words, it may impact a law firm differently than it impacts a consulting firm or a, you know, a biotech or technology company. I do think that, organizations and companies from an HR standpoint are going to provide greater flexibility for a percentage of staff so that maybe 10 or 20% can work from home because they may have issues relative to not being comfortable coming into the office, but you want them to be productive. And we've all, I mean, SPP, we're 70 employees, and I'd say we've been, you know, pretty darn productive, you know, over the past 45 days. So again, I think on the margins, yes, we're going to see some changes, but it's too early to tell what those changes are going to be.
So I'm going to rapid fire you one more from the chat. I've heard a couple of, this is from Jennifer Garbowitz. I've heard a couple of companies who are bringing doctors in to help with suggestions on revising layouts. I wonder if bringing in healthcare design experts will become a permanent thing in office space planning. Since you're our developer, why don't you just grab that one, Dave?
100%. We're in the process of developing an advisory council, an internal to SPP from industry experts throughout the U.S. A big part of that is having somebody from the healthcare network that can really help us to understand what the impact will be. It's going to involve everybody. It's going to involve somebody on the design side, so architects, contractors, healthcare. So we're going to have a spectrum of, you know, thought leaders and business experts that can help advise us over the next, I'm going to say probably the next year, on modifications we need to make, as I said, to design, construction, operational impact, and so forth. So yes, that is a smart thing to do. We're in the process of doing that now. It's going to take us a little bit of time to get these experts together, and hopefully they can really help us out.
I agree. You're on mute, Bridgette.
Somebody muted me. Sorry. I'm sure that was because of the lovely dogs in the background. Okay, that worked out perfectly, actually, Danny, because I'm going to ask you my last question before we let everybody go. I'm sure that you were a big, humongous fan of co-working space already before this, but I'd love to hear what you think is going to happen to it now.
I think there's a mixed bag of reactions to that. So in some ways you can argue and say, oh my goodness, they're going to die because who the heck's going to want to work with someone you don't know from another company in a co-working area and sharing kitchens with all these randoms. And so I think there's that argument. But then on the other side, businesses are going to be looking at the whole conversation around either remote working and or taking advantage of co-working space as a secondary resource for their business. So instead of going and expanding, if they have to expand, they're going to look at those co-working options potentially, whether the landlords provided themselves or it's a co-working company. I think you might see some changes around that, but I don't, obviously we all know we all know the challenges in the media that they've been having over the past couple years or about year or so. But I don't think this is the death of co-working by all means. I think there's still a demand for it. It's going to be an interesting mix of how the people interact inside of those and what they do from their own design standpoint to make them feel comfortable. If they don't shift too much around that, then yeah, they're going to be challenged because people are going to say, I'll just work from home versus paying a couple $100 a month to share with some other person that I don't know, interact. So I think there's a little bit of that. Long term, to Dave's point almost around the security standpoint, I think in about a year to 2 years, people will start to forget exactly how COVID spread around and depending on where it's at. And, you might go right back to the same thing and happy to sit, 3 feet from a random person working on their computer in an open environment. So I think short term, they're going to have challenges, but it's not necessarily, to be gone. Oh, you're muted again.
Jason keeps muting me because of the dogs. So.
It's not me. I don't know who keeps on muting you.
Somebody keeps muting me. Sorry, we've all gotten a little closer to each other through this whole thing of seeing kids in the background and hearing the dogs bark. And it's been I think, a positive part of us working from home. We're getting to see a peek into each other's personal lives. You guys, I knew this was going to be an amazing discussion, and you did not disappoint. And I learned a lot, and I know the people on the call did too. So this is typically the part where I release you and thank you, Trenam, Colliers, SPP, and Beck, for giving us an hour of your time today and the time that led up to with the preparation and everything else, and of course your wisdom. We appreciate the partnership. We appreciate you. And we normally unmute and let the natives go crazy at this point. We would love for you guys to stay and network with us, but you are also released and your obligation is finished if you'd like to go. Thank you so much for being here.